Cool.
Sorry, I recorded to the wrong thing the first time, but now we are recording to the right thing.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jaisal Noor, and I'm joining you today with my colleague, Linda Shaw. We're both with the Solutions Journalism Network. If you're not familiar with Solutions Journalism Network, you will be by the end of this presentation. Basically, we are a nonprofit that supports journalists and newsrooms that are trying to not just cover problems in journalism, but also the solutions to those problems as well. And we'll go more into that. And we found that engagement journalism and solutions journalism go really well hand in hand. So we're going to talk to you today about what solutions journalism is, how solutions journalism and engagement journalism can go together and work together. And then we'll go through some examples, some really good examples of solutions journalism. And our goal basically is to give you guys a good overview of solutions journalism and to leave you with a really solid understanding of the four main pillars, which we'll go into. And we want you to be excited about incorporating this into your work. So hopefully that isn't too lofty of a goal for our time together, but I think we're going to have a really good time.
One quick thing, Jaisal, before you get started. Are you sharing your screen or is Linda sharing screen?
I should be sharing my screen. It says
okay.
Sharing.
Yeah, so right now we actually see like your desktop as well. So if you go into present mode,
okay.
Sorry, we'll just do a moment of troubleshooting here. I'm not sure how you can click. Yeah, if you reshare the screen and then do slideshow. So if you reshare your Google Slides.
Yeah, I clicked something weird. Sorry.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, sorry.
I've done it myself. But yeah, if you share screen and then click slideshow in the upper right, then we'll see the full screen.
Okay, great. I'll get that figured out in a second, but I wanted to break the ice. So I'm going to read a couple prompts, and I wanted you all to use your reaction buttons on your screen to post either a heart emoji if you agree or the open mouth emoji if you disagree, just to break the ice. And of course you don't have to be off camera, but if you want to be off camera, you're more than welcome to. Okay, let's start with the first one. And so if you agree, heart emoji. If you disagree, open mouth emoji. I enjoy writing headlines. Let's see. We got a couple. Yeah, okay. That's not a huge shocker there. Okay, we're kind of pretty divided. I will weigh in as well and say that I do not like writing headlines. I'm personally terrible at writing headlines. All right, next one. Twitter is my best friend. If you agree, show a heart. If you disagree, okay. All right. Okay, we got a couple Twitter fans in here. Awesome. That kind of went how I expected. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. It kind of depends what kind of day it is. And last one, heart emoji if you are very excited about covering the midterms in the next few weeks and covering the 2024 election, and a open mouth emoji if you disagree with that. All right, so I'll give you all a few more seconds. People are uncertain where they stand. So, yeah. Well, so our goal for this presentation is to have everyone here leaving really excited about using solutions journalism and engagement journalism to help cover the election. So I am having a weird thing where I'll try. There we go. There we go. And Okay. Sorry, I've never had this. Oh, there we go. I've never had this problem before, and now it's starting. Yay.
Yeah, and I would just add, as you're doing that, Jessel, that, this is, these are skills that I'm sure Jen and as you've learned as part of Election SOS that you can use not only with the election, but but beyond, right? The folks who are, the folks you're serving are not only interested in, who gets elected, but what those folks do, and holding them accountable for helping solve problems is one way engagement and solutions journalism can be effectively used together over time. Right. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and they really complement each other really well. And so we'll start with explaining solutions journalism, how to create engaged solutions, and then practice identifying the 4 ingredients of solutions journalism. I guess one more question for the audience before we get into it. How many people here have heard of solutions journalism before? See a lot of people.
Marilyn.
Quite a few people are familiar. Great.
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 So if
great.
I could just explain a little bit, our company Graham Media Group has a series called Solutionaries, and it's very much based on this premise. Yeah, Linda, you know about Solutionaries? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's great.
Great.
So this will be a little bit of review for some of you, but
yeah, it'll be a review, and we'll have some really good examples for the folks that are familiar. We'll have some good examples that we'll dig into, and we'll go into breakout rooms as well. And so we'll have a chance for you to share your knowledge with everyone else. So in short, solutions journalism is rigorous evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. I think that is a great summary, because we want it, solutions journalism needs to be rigorous. You need to be a good solution story. It has to really comprehensively examine the issue. It has to be evidence-based. Evidence is one of the main pillars of solutions journalism. If you don't have evidence, then how do you know if a solution is working or not? And solutions journalism is reporting on responses to social problems. Sort of how we see it is that the current media model focuses heavily on problems, which is, it's great. Our society does face a lot of problems, but without also reporting on the responses to it, we're not providing a full story, and we're in fact providing a one-sided story that has a lot of negative consequences on our society. And that's, of course, very true with democracy and elections as well. So these are the 4 pillars. I like to think of them as the 4 ingredients. If you're baking a cake and you're missing one of those, one key ingredient, that cake is not going to turn out really well. So every solution story has to have these 4 pillars. And as we've talked about, the response is sort of like what the story is about. So this, I think, can be confusing for folks. The response isn't the problem, it's the response to the problem. And that sometimes it's easy to kind of focus on what the problem is and to identify a problem, which is a good start. But the story is about the response. Roughly 90% of the piece in a solution story will be about the response. There's all different kinds of evidence you can use, and we'll give you some examples. But evidence doesn't necessarily have to come from a researcher or a scholar. People's lived experiences are also evidence, and we'll go into some examples of qualitative and quantitative examples of evidence. But especially for covering elections, you're covering democracy, there's a whole range of great sources you can use to gather evidence. Insights are how others can use the response and the evidence to the social problem. So if you're looking, and we'll go into more of these examples, but if your community is facing a challenge, for example, with mail-in voting, you could look at how other communities are dealing with it, and the insight would be what your community can learn from that. And the limitations the fourth pillar are also, extremely important. If you don't have limitations, your article is going to come off as a puff piece. We're not trying to promote any one solution. We're trying to give our readers and our viewers and our listeners an honest assessment of how effective that solution is. And we'll have some tips on how to find solutions, and we'll go through that as well. In short, it's good journalism. It tells the whole story. It investigates problems happening right now. We've had in some of our workshops, I've had a lot of people say, well, someone is proposing this policy in our community. That in itself is not a solution story. You can make that into a solution story, and we can talk about how, but we want to be talking about problems that are happening right now. It strengthens accountability if, and we'll talk about how in solutions journalism, one of the main takeaways can be who is doing it better. And that is the basis of some really great solution stories. If your community is facing a challenge, who is overcoming those challenges in a better way? And there are an infinite amount of stories that can come out of there. And another reason why it's great journalism and why it's really important and why it goes so well with engaged journalism is that, we can look at problems that are seen as unavoidable. And if we can show that other people are doing it better, then it becomes unacceptable. And I think that is a real positive thing, a real positive impact that solutions journalism can have. And so you might be asking, why solutions journalism? It sounds like it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be really time consuming. And solutions journalism in itself is a solution to a problem. Studies of, a lot of us, even journalists, are burned out with the news. A lot of us dread, listening to the news or watching the news because it's so overwhelmingly negative. And that's not to say that things aren't necessarily in bad shape right now, but, we also need hope. We also need to know how we can address these massive challenges we're facing. Just 1 in 4 Americans trust the media, and our research has found that doing solutions reporting helps build that trust. If you can show that, if you're engaged with the community and you're listening and you can address the problems that they want addressed, that is a really good way to build up trust. And nearly 40% of Americans often or sometimes avoid the news. So that is a huge audience that's going untapped right now that we can tap into. And studies have found, this is from the University of Texas, even with elections reporting, solutions-focused reporting on the threats to elections, including cybersecurity, voter purges, and aging voting machines, was more likely to leave readers feeling enthusiastic about voting and less anxious, sad, or angry than stories that simply describe the threat. So, this makes sense, but it's also backed by data, and we can share more of that data if you are curious. And so to review the 4 pillars, the response, it's important because if the response is worth featuring, it's worth its own story, not just a short mention. The response will dominate the story. Evidence, you need evidence to prove that the response is either working or not, and that's really what makes the story newsworthy. What lessons can we learn from the response and the evidence? That is insight. Are we fulfilling our mission to serve society, to really educate our audiences, to educate society about the role that they can play? And finally, limitations. We're not doing advocacy or PR. We're examining the response, not promoting it. There's all different kinds of ways to address limitations, but that is important. A simple way to tackle that is to ask your sources, what can't you do? What could you do if you had more resources? What problems does this response not solve? So it is, that there's oops, sorry about that. There's multiple ways to address that problem. And so here's a quick cheat sheet, and we are going to share this deck with you after the presentations. You'll have access to all of this, but our great social media team created this really handy guide to reporting solution stories. 6 easy steps. Who, after you've identified the problem, who's doing it better? And if you need to find examples, our solution story tracker contains more than 13,000 stories in a searchable database, and that's a great place to look for who's doing it better. How do we know? And that points to evidence. Like we said, all kinds of evidence, but we need that evidence. Really, I would say before you continue on to the next steps. Don't do that, Lucy. Sorry, my dog is chomping on a treat. How is it done? The story is really focused on how the response works. A simple way to look at it is your story should explain to people that want to replicate and learn from the solution how they could bring it into their community. We have to examine the limitations, identify what can be learned for other communities. And finally, this speaks to engagement, but listen to how people respond to your story, especially if it's coming from an engaged perspective. You want to know the reaction on the ground, and that can lead to more stories, including more solution stories, as you learn more and engage more with your audience. I just wanted to give a minute to see if anyone has questions or any clarifications so far. And feel free to come off mic or raise your hand. We can call on you.
Don't hold back.
Sorry?
I said, don't hold back. If you have
Okay,
questions,
yeah, don't hold back. We want you to,
them.
yeah.
We do often joke that, we use the word solutions, and that sometimes can lead a misleading impression. Really, we should be called responses to social problems network, but that doesn't quite roll off the tongue. Because, when we use the word solutions, it can lead people to think, we're talking about silver bullets or that there's easy ways to solve big problems. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about not stopping at reporting the problem, but asking that question, who's doing it better, and looking for those newsworthy examples where progress is getting made, stories that too often get left on the table, that we don't ask that question and find.
Yeah, and thanks, Linda. That's really important. Yeah, we're not suggesting that any problem we're facing, especially with democracy or elections, can be fixed with one solution, but there are people that are making efforts to address those problems, and they deserve attention too. But just focusing on the problem, we're doing a disservice.
And one more thing, then this is the way it really, in one way, is really good to pair with engagement reporting, because like the folks that you're working with and your audiences, especially the folks that are experiencing the problems more acutely, they know there's a problem. You don't need to tell them that, or maybe you need to tell them that to some extent. But in addition to many of them already knowing they have a problem, what they're interested in is what they can do about it. Not just individually, but what our communities can do about it. And I heard a reporter at the CIR say that once, and it really rang true, right? Who are you writing for? If you're writing for the people who are experiencing the problem, what they want to know is what to do about it.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's a really powerful tool, especially when when you can ask the question, who is doing it better? You can share that the work that's being done in other places and that's relevant to your community. Oftentimes, especially with local issues, we feel like we're living in a silo. We're dealing with these problems as individuals or communities, when in fact there's America has over something like 5,000 counties. There's got to be one county out there that's doing a better job addressing that problem. And that goes for states, as well. And there's lessons we can learn from other countries as well. All right. So here's some questions for solution stories. And we're going to share some questions that are more specific to engaged solutions in a little bit. But just in general, like we're really hammering home, who's doing it better? How does the response work? Who is the response not working for? What does the research say? There's a variety of different research you can look into. We'll talk about sources as well, but there's research can be from universities, from nonprofits, from think tanks, government agencies. If there is a solution happening on the ground, there's going to be people that are interested in gathering data on it. Local research institutions like colleges and universities often put a lot of put a lot of resources into examining these issues. What do critics say? You know, that's one of my favorite questions. What is the strongest argument against this solution? And that's something you can ask your sources, and especially if they've done a lot of media, like that's something that they can share with you. Is it being replicated elsewhere? If the solution that you're examining is part of a national network, and that's often the case, your sources are going to know where else it's being tried and have some insight on how that's working or how that's not working, and what are the barriers to replication. You know, every community is unique. Every community has unique challenges. What might work in one form in one city won't necessarily work in the same way. You know, there's unique challenges that every community faces or every state faces. Okay. And you know, so these are some tips to avoid advocacy. You know, beyond just talking about limitations. You know, don't predict the future. Don't, you know, you can only report on the evidence you have. You can't predict whether something is going to work or not. Briefly paint the full landscape. You know, we'll talk about how, you know, in solution stories, sometimes it's helpful to take a narrow slice of the problem and the solution, but you want to give your readers, you know, a wider context of how the problem is unfolding and the challenges that are faced there. And we want to avoid hero worship. The story isn't about solution stories are not about individuals making actions. It's about the idea. It's about the movement. So it's not about individual people, or if it is one person doing, if it is one person doing the solution, then that also speaks to limitations, because if one person is doing everything, then there will be challenges to replication. And as we talked about, we need to explain the limitations to our audience as well. So I wanted to spend a few minutes to open up, give you all a chance to weigh in, and feel free to go on to unmute or share your thoughts in the chat, and you can raise your hand if you want to share something, share a response. But so 2 questions. We'll start with how solutions journalism can be used to cover democracy and elections. So you guys have been talking about engaged elections. You've been talking about, how to communicate with your audience and listen to them and gather their input. Ideas on how solutions journalism can be used hand in hand with that.
So are you looking for comments?
Yeah, yes, please.
Because I just have one. So the thing that keeps running through my head is when we talk about these stories of solutions journalism and, trying to focus on the idea versus, a leader or something like that, it's really kind of difficult in our discussions because everybody's still trying to get their head around this, right? In our editorial discussions and things like that. And trying not to seem partisan in any way, and trying to keep, and not seem like you're on one side or another, but trying to keep it just strictly journalism. And so it's really kind of one of those things where no matter how you frame it or how you present it, someone's going to say that it's either it's the liberal view or it's a conservative view or whatever. And it's really something that we're trying to make sure that we don't become or even seem that we are partisan in any way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm curious what outlet you work for.
So I work for WJXT Channel 4. We are an independent station in Jacksonville, and we're owned by Graham Media Group. And I'm actually digital director, so I oversee newsforjax.com and a lot of our other platforms.
Yeah, and I'm sure Linda has some thoughts on this. Do you want to?
And I think Linda's worked with corporate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think Linda might be frozen.
She might be frozen.
Yeah. well, we'll wait for her to come back, but yeah, I would say that that's one of the real oh, you're back.
Am I back? Oh, sorry
Yeah,
about
you're
that.
back.
Yeah, I have worked a little bit with the Solutionaries team with my colleagues. So I would say, and I worked for the Seattle Times for a long time and had done solutions journalism there with a project called Education Lab. And actually, I found doing solutions journalism really actually helped take the partisanship to the extent it existed in education, or the two sidesism as it existed in education, out of it. Because as you're examining the response, you're not doing the he said, she said, this group says this about this group says that about this. What you're really looking at is the idea, what evidence there is that shows it's working, what the limitations are, and that kind of takes it more out of the political realm. So when you're doing solutions journalism around elections and democracy, for example, and we can send, I think maybe we have this later in this presentation, but there's some really good stories that look at mail-in voting. And it's not what X person thinks about it or Y person thinks about it or Republican thinks about it, but Democrat, but what's the actual evidence? What did it do to voter turnout in the places that use it among Republicans and among Democrats? What was the rate of, voter fraud or whatever, right? You just, you examine that evidence as well as ask questions, because there's no silver bullets, there's always limitations, there's nothing that solves everything. But anyway, I'm probably going on too long, but it does sort of, when you're examining the response, it does kind of take that partisanship in a sense out of it. Does that make sense, Marilyn?
Yes, it does. And, I think the thing is it's going to take some time for us to really, get this down in general assignment reporting, right? I mean, we do our big picture and like you even said, this takes longer, this format takes longer to report and a lot more investigative work. And I think in a general sense, we're looking at campaigns here locally, and we have a campaign going where there's two sides clearly, and one side is campaigning against a candidate for judge because he has tended to be lenient on sexual offenders, according to this group. And they're providing examples and things like that. And so, when we report on these things, it feels sometimes that, again, not everyone's going to understand or be happy because they're just hearing what they want to hear. And they're not really looking at the big picture or the full picture because they have their own biases, I guess. So it's just, again, it's just a tough thing to kind of put your finger on, especially with general assignment reporting, and how we best make sure that everything that we're doing is about not just reporting the problem, but also, what is the best way to, because, you want to get people to vote, you want to get people to make their own decisions, but you don't want, clearly there's some ads out there that are just not right. So we have to just say this is not true. And then people are going to be mad at you and call you partisan. So again, I think it's one of those things that you're never going to make everybody happy. But I just wanted to bring that up because
that indeed is very true. I would just summarize again and say, there are many reasons to do many different kinds of stories. When you do a solution story, again, to sort of summarize, you're talking about not what people think should happen or what people think, what think could happen, but what's actually happening. And that, I think, does take some of the partisan, not all of it. As you said, people will still hear what they want to hear to some degree, but it does take some of the partisanship out of it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for addressing that.
Yeah. And I would just quickly add that, another way, if you want to avoid, if you want to take a different whole spin on it, you can not even, make the story about the debate that's happening, but you can just look at best practices nationally. And so that way you're informing your audience while not necessarily even getting into, the back and forth at all. It can just be about, it could just be a side story saying these are the best practices to address these issues nationally. And this is what's working. This is the model program, in California. And this is what they found. And this is the evidence. And then you can talk about, the challenges to implementing it locally. So that's a whole nother, that could be another way to sort of approach it from a solutions angle. Great. Well, second question. How would a solutions approach be different than a traditional approach in covering election issues and covering democracy? So, do we have any volunteers?
I mean, so my name is TJ and I'm at the Baltimore Banner, and I think in a perfect, if everything's done, when you finish reading a story, you don't feel powerless. I think from a reader perspective, a solutions journalism you would see constructive ways to address the problem, and hopefully a way to either insert yourself or to do something, whether it's vote or something more engaged than that.
Yeah. Anyone else? That's great. And TJ, I'm in Baltimore too, so great to connect. And yeah, I'm a fan of the Banner.
Thank you.
I'll add something there, just in terms of, I think about the user experience. This kind of builds up what TJ was saying of, you read something and it just gets your anxiety up because it's just all about a problem and you feel powerless to do something. But one of the ways that solutions journalism can not only say, hey, there's a solution and leave you with a different feeling, but it can also allow you to be more civically engaged by potentially, getting involved with the people who are doing that solution, if that's something you really care about. And I see, journalism as one, rung on the ladder, one piece of the ecosystem of civic engagement and people feeling empowered and that they have agency. So them just knowing that there are people trying different things, they can reach out, find it, support that solution and make it happen better, faster, et cetera. So I really like the fact that it can push people from the couch to, the streets or whatever on whatever issues that they really care about.
Yeah, and especially in a city like Baltimore, where our problems are vast and they affect everyone, I think there is that appetite for wanting to see change and wanting to, improve things. And so I think it's a really valuable tool, especially in places like Baltimore. Great. We have anyone else? I want to make sure everyone had a chance to weigh in if they chose to. And we'll come back to this question at the end. We'll wrap up on this because I'm really curious to what you all have taken away from it. So now we're gonna have Linda take over for a bit.
Yeah, and this just sort of extends what we started to talk about in terms of the combination of engaged journalism and solutions journalism, and talk a little bit about some of the work that some news organizations have done to date that we sort of called citizen solutions starting 2 years ago. Yeah. Oh, and again, this is just a piece of how to do solutions journalism, because often folks think, gosh, there's no solution, obviously, to homelessness, there's no solution to climate change. And that's true. There's no one solution to anything. There's no silver bullets, as I said before. And to do these stories, often it's good to think about a smaller slice of the problem. Really, any big problem is a compilation of smaller interrelated problems. And to sort of look at those one by one is a good way to think about how to do your solutions journalism. So what slice of the problem is important to your audience and who's doing a better job with that is often a good way to start to break down thinking, I can't do, there's no solution to homelessness. Go ahead, Jaisal. So citizen solution stories, we worked with about 10 news organizations a couple of years ago. As I said, actually it started right as the pandemic hit, which was a little challenging, but folks still did great work out of it. To combine reaching out to your audiences, the citizens agenda approach to elections reporting, which you guys are familiar with, right? Jen, everybody's here familiar with that, right? Yep. With solutions journalism. And we saw solutions journalism as one really important way to use the information you gain from your audiences. When you're asking them, what are the issues you care most about that you want politicians to be talking about to compete for your votes, right? What do you do with that information? And, you can ask the candidate, use that information to question candidates, of course. That's a really good and powerful way to do that. But there are various ways to use that information, but we think one really powerful way is to do solutions journalism around those issues as well. Because again, the folks that are raising those issues care about those issues and they want to see what can be done. They don't want to just know there's a problem. And these are some of the questions you can ask. We talked about evidence, and evidence as being key to solution stories, and that's true. Essentially, that's what makes them newsworthy. And that's what keeps them from being advocacy, right? You're looking for the newsworthy responses, ones that are making newsworthy progress. And the way you judge that is from the evidence. And this is a slide that just helps show you all the different kinds of evidence that you might think about in doing solution stories. And I always advise folks when they're trying to start on a solution story is to look for that evidence first, because that helps you decide whether you have a solution story or not. You may find out that you have another kind of story, and that's fine too. But if you want it to be a solution story, often it's good to start with, well, what evidence is out there? Is it valuable? Is it credible? And it can be quantitative as well as qualitative evidence, as you can see from this list. So we always talk about solutions journalism as sort of flipping the script in terms of how you approach a story. And this is one example of how you might do that. So for example, a candidate might propose a housing first policy. And here's some of the questions you could ask to sort of approach that from a solutions angle. First of all, it can help you vet candidates' proposals, asking these questions. Who's tried it? Is there evidence it's a good idea? Is there evidence that you're making progress? Could it work here? And what would it cost? All those questions to examine what candidates are proposing. Here's one example of a newsroom that did this combination of the citizens agenda and solutions journalism. This is a digital, relatively new digital outlet in Santa Cruz, California, called Santa Cruz Local. They did the whole citizens agenda approach and asked their audiences what they wanted politicians to be talking about to compete for their vote. And then they did follow up and have continued to follow up on some of those issues, doing solutions journalism around them in ways that have had impact. Sorry, I don't know, I have a frog in my throat today. So they asked those questions, and then is there another slide here, Jaisal, about what they did? Yeah. So they picked out one of those issues that was high on the list about law enforcement and violence, and looked at what other communities were doing that were having success in reducing police violence. One of those places was one you may have heard of, in Eugene, Oregon, where mental health professionals go out on mental health calls to police instead of police, which has really reduced the level of police violence on those calls. And after reporting on that, the city decided to look into adopting a similar program in Santa Cruz. So it had a big impact. So I know that we can talk about solutions journalism a lot, and really what helps folks the most is sort of to dig into it and see what it can look like. And I think that's what we're planning to do here. And we picked out a story. No solution stories are perfect. We tried to pick out a short one because for the purposes of workshops like this, it's long stories are hard to you can spend a lot of time, we don't spend a lot of time having you read a long story. But here's a good solid solution story that again was part of that Citizen Solutions project from Washington City paper. They also found that when they asked questions of their audience about what they wanted politicians to be talking about. Ranked choice voting was high on the list, and then they did a solution story around that. So Jessel, I think you're going to lead folks through this exercise, right?
Yeah, I posted the link in the chat if everyone wants to take a minute. It's not a very long article. Let's have everyone take a minute and read it.
And the idea as they read it is to dig in and see how, identify where these 4 pillars of solutions journalism exist in this article, right, Jessel?
Yes. So as you're going along, just jot down the problem and the response, what evidence is mentioned, what the limitations or caveats are, and then the insight that is included in the article. And we'll give you all about 5 minutes to do that.
To read the article or to?
Yeah, to read the article.
Okay.
And then we'll work on the responses together. How's everyone doing? Are you guys ready to discuss, or do you need a few more minutes? Good. All right. Great. So let's kick it off. And feel free to come off mic and weigh in or share your thoughts in the chat. But what would you say the problem and response were in this story?
I'd say the problem is sometimes candidates get elected with a very small percentage of the vote, and so ranked choice voting is a potential solution to that.
Great, great. Anyone else? Thought, agree, disagree? Great. And yeah, and I think it also mentioned that, there's voter apathy can be a problem. And if people get turned off the election process if they feel like their vote doesn't count. So those are all of some of the problems that ranked choice voting can solve for. Does anyone want to weigh in on the evidence? What kind of evidence did this article have? The different types and if you thought they were effective examples of evidence.
It was the two papers from about focusing on St. Paul, Minneapolis metro area. And then that was the main one, and there was the second one from San Francisco State. And I thought about as well as they could do given the space. And I think while trying to maintain the reader's attention, I thought the figure that it diminished turnout by 10% was good because it addressed one of the concerns that someone in DC had on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I actually think it did make me wonder whether there's more evidence out there. The two studies, I would have liked sort of a line. Now I'm being too critical. I always say journalists get really critical and examine these stories. Here I am doing it. But are those the only two studies out there? That's what made me wonder. Like, could there have been a line that if the two biggest studies so far or something like that to characterize the value of those, the ones that they mentioned, right? Anyway.
And yeah, it does mention that Maine implemented it. It's being used in a number of states. But I'd be curious to know, what was the turnout? Did the turnout increase or decrease in those areas? And I think New York City also started using it, and I think that's had some interesting results. So yeah, yeah, and you don't have to include every bit of evidence because like you said, you have to maintain the reader's attention. You give them and I feel like that sort of the evidence ties into the limitations as well in this story. It does a great job, and I think you have to be transparent. If the evidence is mixed, then say that. If you don't know, then say that. That's the most important thing with evidence. All right, so that sort of goes into limitations. Does anyone want to share their thoughts on the limitations in this article?
The article sort of addressed that ranked choice voting can actually decrease voter turnout.
Mm-hmm. And that's a limitation because then it might not have the intended result. So that would be a really important limitation. Anyone else?
Maybe put some stuff in the chat as well, Jaisal.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Takes potentially more time, possibly decrease voter turnout, requires voter education, which yeah, the article did mention that it would yeah, it can be a confusing process to have to rank those and to know what the next steps are. And I would say one of the limitations that I don't think was in here would be if there was like an additional cost burden for local, the money is often a limitation in solution stories. Like, are there resources for that? How much would that put a strain on some other budget? It's always a good question to ask. But I'd be curious, because I imagine it would take more resources to do ranked choice voting, or maybe it require different kinds of machines. That is something that I think that comes to mind for me. And finally, insight, value, newsworthiness.
I like that it came, that the news peg came off of what popped up in a debate. And it was nice that they had evidence from their readers to back up that was a primary concern. So this was an opportunity to provide some insight to that. So it was very newsworthy in that way. There was one secondary limitation that I thought of that I just keep thinking of myself in the voting booth and feeling so overwhelmed looking at. Sometimes it's hard to find the one person that you're willing to get behind. And the idea that I have to get behind 4 to 5 more people is difficult. And when you're talking about those smaller races, especially, I can't recall what the specific race for this story was, there is a dearth of coverage for some of those candidates. So aside from your top 2, it can be difficult to find out where people stand on issues that you care about beyond those 2. So that's sort of like a secondary thing that wasn't covered, but I thought of.
I liked the insights from Rob Ritchie of Fair Vote, and he said that like ranked choice voting can increase the power, like the power of your vote changes, because you have more impact if your candidate doesn't win and it's somebody that you've like secondarily or third or something. And then also that it incentivizes voters to learn more about the candidates, and incentivizes candidates to reach out to more voters. I thought that was really, I actually thought that was the highlight of the story for me.
And to Marilyn's question earlier, notice what's not in the story, right? I mean, there's a little bit of it, but not a lot of it. Like, what Republicans think about ranked voting, what, going to, the usual suspects, asking what they think about ranked choice voting. Most of this is focused on examining the evidence about the benefits and the possible drawbacks of it. And that's what I sort of admire about the story. The frame is examining this.
And it doesn't really go into party politics at all. Sorry, I'm playing catch up. My computer shut down. It was just a whole technical thing. But did you guys talk a little bit about the whole, the financial aspect of having publicly funded campaigns? That was in the article, makes it more fair, I guess, so that rich people aren't the only ones who have that advantage.
Yeah, you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that just really stuck out to me because, again, the ranked voting I've heard of before, and then as part of that, I just thought it was interesting when they say, it's good to make elections more accessible. Wilson says it's really expensive to run for office, and publicly funded elections open the door for candidates who aren't already wealthy or well-connected. That's interesting to me. It could allow, again, more people to get involved in the political process that probably wouldn't be able to because of lack of impact of their finances or just, their connections.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that's an example of a story addressing 2 different solutions, but doing it in a way that still focuses, it's mentioning that is, something that's related, but it doesn't take away from the greater story. And that's a whole nother, and if that's something that they learned or got insight from a source, that would be a great follow-up election, right? Because a growing number of cities, like I'm thinking of New York, are using publicly financed elections, and that can have it. I think it's, from what I've read, it's had some big impacts. And I think in Baltimore, we're going to have that in a couple years. We had, I also kind of brought this up earlier, that we were talking about how the problem has to be happening now, but we want to have data for the solution. So even though DC, is still doing one vote as of this election, you can still see how it's playing out elsewhere and how it could, right? That's the question it's asking, how it could have, what kind of changes it could have there. So it's still staying in the solutions frame. And the other question I wanted to ask is, does anyone feel like this comes off as advocacy?
No, I don't think so. And that's, I think, what Linda was talking about. It really didn't feel like there was any kind of partisan information or, benefiting one side or the other.
Yeah, and TJ makes a great point. You really want to explain how it's done and how it's implemented, because that's the best way, to get insight, is to actually, assume the reader doesn't know, especially if they're a DC audience, they're not going to know how it's done. So that's a great point. Great.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to add that, sometimes that can be the narrative engine of these stories. Not this one so much, but, explaining how something came about and the obstacles people had to overcome to make it happen, and, how they got it underway, sometimes can be the real narrative engine of these kinds of stories, sort of a how done it, we often say. It's kind of on the formula of like a House episode, right? If you know that old TV show where they have a problem and the whole narrative engine is how they solve it.
So, okay, great job, everybody. So we have been going for an hour straight. Does anyone want like a 4 or 5 minute break to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or anything? Or do you want to keep on going through? Any thoughts?
I might take a quick break.
Okay, we can come back in like, let's say 4 minutes. Does that work for everybody? 4 minutes? Okay, I'm gonna do the same. All right, we are back. And give a shout out to Mayan, because I didn't realize that you had produced the NPR piece that accompanies this, but that's very cool that small world of solutions journalism. That is very cool. And so that's awesome that you had also reported this story. Great. So we have just a few minutes left. We actually have 4 minutes left. So I want to give everyone a chance to, share any insight they might have, something they learned or a question they still have, in terms of the 4 pillars, or what your takeaways are from this presentation.
I'm wondering where are good places to start, like, germinating ideas for solutions journalism. Like, sometimes they fall in your lap, but sometimes it's like you're grasping at these big issues. And yeah.
One place that I found very fruitful, and I've watched other reporters find very fruitful, is just asking the folks, that are involved in the issue at various levels, like, who are you looking to for a model? What do you wish might be tried here? We did that with gifted education in the Seattle area, and this doesn't always happen, but parents, teachers, state officials, people who are involved in gifted education all kept pointing to one school district, Miami, who had really succeeded in having its gifted education be more racially balanced, more reflective of its district than any other district in the nation. So sometimes that's a really good, the folks that are really involved in the issue often can answer that question and help give you leads.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing engaged elections, you know, the people that are facing challenges in your community are also facing challenges that are happening to other communities. And even if no one is working on a solution in your community, there's going to be evidence of how some type of solution is likely working out, you know, somewhere else in the United States or even globally. So, I'll send a follow-up email to everyone that attended, and I'll include the slide and my email. And I'm always happy to bounce, you know, you can use me as a resource, bounce ideas off. You know, I'm happy to share ideas. We can set up a call and chat, and happy to help out how I can.
Oh, and just, we'd be remiss in not answering that question by mentioning the solution story tracker as well. We have a repository of like 13,000 stories, which is also a good place to kind of mine for story ideas and see, you know, what else has been written about from a solutions perspective. So.
A quick question for you, Linda. Are the stories in that tracker handpicked by SJN folks, or are they posed by the authors?
They're mostly proposed by the authors or anybody. You know, anybody can submit a story to that tracker. They are vetted to make sure they're actual, you know, have enough, you know, they're strong enough as solution stories to be considered solution stories. You know, up until recently, we may not be able to continue to do that. It's pretty resource intensive. But up until now, yeah, mostly it's news organizations and, you know, reporters and editors submitting those stories to us.
Yeah, one quick thing I just wanted to add to is that, you know, the solutions journalism can happen in the process of engaged journalism in a variety of ways. So you could be soliciting questions from your audience about, you know, what questions do you have about the mechanics of voting or something, and someone asks, why is it so hard to do X, Y, and Z thing, or their own confusion about something points to a possibility of doing a story about who has figured out how to do this thing that is confusing or hard better for the public. And then there's also the fact you could just do a regular story where you're pointing to a problem, and at the end of it asking, do you have places that are working on solutions, whether it's in this geographic region or elsewhere, so that you could do follow-up stories on traditional, more conflict-based or problem-based stories with a solutions lens as well. So thinking about how to both create solution stories out of the engagement you're getting, and then to solicit the kind of engagement that would lead to more are a few ways to think about it as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jen, because not every story is a solution story. You're not going to be able to shoehorn every piece into a solutions frame, but after you've done that traditional reporting, that can very often lead to some good solution story ideas. And, you know, some of the stories we looked at today, like ranked choice voting, which also mentioned public financing. That's a story that almost one of us could do in our communities and see what the impact is. And, you know, there's a growing body of evidence that speaks to whether that's effective or not. So, yeah, I would say, yeah, to emphasize Linda's point, the story tracker is a great resource. I'm not gonna lie, I sometimes just search random stories through there because it's hard to find how other communities are dealing with these same issues, and there's definitely a lot to learn. And yeah, 13,000 stories and counting from all over the world. So there's definitely a great resource. Yes, we're just out of time, and I wanted to thank you all. This was really fun. Thanks for being such a great audience. And yeah, I have our contact information up on this slide, and I'll follow up with everyone with the deck. So you have that, you have the links and the examples, and yeah, and please be in touch. And yeah, please send us the stories that you're working on. And we'd love to check them out, and you know, happy to share them with the tracker and with our folks. And you know, your story might end up in one of these presentations one day.
Great, thanks. Great to meet you all. We're serious. We love talking about these stories, so don't hesitate to call seriously at any point as if you're pursuing one. So
Thank you so much.